Alrighty, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our All In for Kansas Kids Strengthening Early Childhood in Kansas monthly systems building webinar for August 14th, 2024. August 14th is also considered Dolly Parton's Imagination Library of Kansas Day. So celebrate by reading a book with a little one and reminding all of those in your life with kiddos under 5 that there are some free books that they can get with through Dolly Parton's Imagination Library. My name is Julia Gruss. I am a research project coordinator at KU's Center for Public Partnerships and Research, and I will be your webinar facilitator for today. I am also joined by my colleague, Brianna Houston. She is a research project specialist with the Center for Public Partnerships and Research, and she will be monitoring our chat, getting everybody in from the waiting room, as well as dropping any relevant links into the chat that you will see throughout our slides this afternoon. So as always, our webinars are held on the second Wednesday of the month. Sign up for the All In for Kansas Kids e-newsletter that goes out weekly on Monday. You can sign up by going to www.kschildrenscabinet.org. We have a wonderful presentation for you today on family-friendly, family-forward workplaces in Kansas. And we have Brenda Bandy, Sophia Ringering, and Kim Polson joining us to speak on that. And following our presentation, I'll have a few early childhood systems updates for you, so stick around for those. But as I said, kicking off our presentations today, we have Brenda Bandy, Executive Director of the Kansas Breastfeeding Coalition. She oversees the KBC's programs and policy work and is an active member of the Early Childhood Recommendations panel. She is passionate about bringing people together to remove barriers that prevent families from thriving in Kansas. So starting us off, welcome, Brenda. Thank you so much for being here. You can go right ahead.
Thank you, Julia. Can you hear me all right?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for having me. And as you mentioned, I am a part of the Early Childhood Recommendations panel, and it's really on behalf of the task force that I am addressing you today because I'm excited to share about a recommendation that came out of our work. Next slide. As many of you are aware, in the current Early Childhood Strategic Plan, there's Strategy 4.2, which is to address family-friendly and promote family-friendly workplaces throughout public and private sectors. So it was this Strategy 4.2 that was basically our call to action for the task force that grew out of the recommendations panel. Next slide. This is the group that has been meeting for the last year that created the recommendation. And there was actually a work group prior to that in the previous year that also worked on this recommendation. So it's really 2 years in the making. And if anyone in this work group is present today, please come off camera, wave to the crowd because you all did mighty work. Not only did we meet during the early childhood recommendations panel meetings, but we met between meetings to really fully look into what it means to be a family-friendly workplace, what's happening in Kansas. And it was really a collaborative effort amongst all of these different organizations and individuals who are working on family-friendly workplaces in our state. So thank you to this mighty work group members because from their work came the next slide. This is the background on why we are working on this. As I said, it was in the strategic plan, but in the recent needs assessment from 2024, they identified the need for a broader reach for family-friendly workplace policies. So that came out of the needs assessment. So clearly the work continues to need to be addressed. And from those findings, we understand that there is a connection between family-friendly well-being and workplace support. Families need support in the workplace, not only as individuals, but also for their families. And I know Kansas Power the Positive has been making that connection for us here in the state for 10 years. And we're going to hear more about that later in the presentation. But by establishing family-friendly workplaces, employers can facilitate parents in the workplace to help them to thrive, and therefore their children are going to thrive as well. So this is the background, the rationale, if you will, for the recommendation. Next slide. So this is the recommendation that the Children's Cabinet officially adopted at their August 2nd meeting. So it says that the Children's Cabinet recommends the adoption of these two resources that are currently existing in our state: the Family Friendly Workplace Survey that we're going to hear more about from Sophia in a little bit, and the Guide to Family Forward Workplaces as tools for employers that they can select and implement family-friendly policies that best suits their workplace. So the cabinet will include these workplaces, these two tools in their website, and they will also encourage partners, including other state agencies such as Labor and Commerce and perhaps others, to help employers to fully implement these policies. So it's really kind of a seal of approval, if you will, from the Children's Cabinet for both of these tools, and to really use their influence with other state agencies to really get the word out. So next slide. So we do know that businesses want to do this work. They think that they are providing family-friendly policies and practices, but we know sometimes there's a disconnect. And Sophia is going to tell us a little bit more about that later. There can be a disconnect between what employers are offering and what the experience is of their employees. And I think the third bullet point here really highlights that. This is a national survey that 4 out of 10 employees feel that their employer is not currently family friendly. And that's kind of amazing because I think most employers would probably say that they are. So again, the disconnect. Next slide. One of the policies that we know has a huge impact on family-friendly workplaces and families in general is having access to paid time off, whether that's to care for a newborn or adoption, or whether it's to provide caregiving for other family members. So I wanted to just point out in this one particular practice, paid leave. This is the result of a survey of employers from SHRM, which is the Society for Human Resource Management. Every year, they do a survey of their members, and this is specific to Kansas employers. So I just filtered the survey to Kansas, and look how many are offering paid leave of any sort. It is under 30%. And when we look at paid family leave, which is the broadest definition of leave, the care of any family member for an extended period, only 15% of Kansas employers are doing this. So sometimes we often think that, oh, everybody has access to paid leave because maybe the people we know and love do. But that's not the case in Kansas and elsewhere across the nation. Next slide. Here's another way of looking at paid leave. These are national numbers, not specific to Kansas, but it's not equally offered across sectors. We know that those that are in leisure, hospitality, construction, lower wage earners, you can see in the bottom 25%, and small employers, those with fewer than 100 employees, do not normally offer paid leave. It's much more rare. So it's not until you get to large service-based industries that you get to paid leave being the norm. So again, I just wanted to set the stage that this is one of the family-friendly practices, that it's just not offered for everyone. And it's also not offered equitably when we look at people in low wage positions. They simply don't have access or rarely have access to paid leave. And we know this impacts them as a family to be able to provide the security that they need for their children. Next slide. So, coming out of this conversation, there was a campaign that was launched last April with support from the Children's Cabinet called the Guide to Family Forward Workplaces. This is one of the two resources that was mentioned in the recommendation that I just read to you. And so, I want to explore and kind of unpack for you what is Family Forward Workplaces, the guide, and what was this campaign? Because these are tools to raise awareness for employers employers about the practices, and then also to give them some ideas and some nuggets, if you will, about what they can take back to their practices. So it really was an awareness campaign to let employers know. That was the audience for this campaign. So the foundation is the guide, which is a physical guide that we mailed out to over 3,000 businesses across the state that arrived on their doorstep. We've done 2 mailings and are planning a third. But let's unpack what's inside the guide and what's on the web page for this as well. Next slide. Part of the campaign was a social media graphics. So you can see here that we addressed paid leave. We actually addressed 4 key policies: paid leave, accommodations for pregnant and breastfeeding workers, flexible scheduling, and access to childcare in the form of subsidized childcare for employers. So those were the 4 key policies that family forward workplaces really dove into and provided support. So the social media graphics is here what you can see. Next slide. The campaign also included postcards, each one diving into each of those 4 practices. So over 3,000 employers received those postcards, and they were staggered about every 2 to 3 weeks, and they went out prior to the guide going out. So it's kind of teasers, if you will, the postcards talking about the individual 4 policies, followed then by the guide that went out that wrapped it all together. It had a little bookmark with seeds in it for wildflowers. And in our second mailing, we included an insert for the Kansas Power to the Positive survey and resources to point them to that additional resource that we're going to hear more about as well. Next slide. We also did billboards. You can see most of these were in Wichita area, but also in Topeka, again, to raise awareness around for employers on when we say family forward practices, what are we talking about? And we highlighted those 4 key policies again, over and over in the mailings, in the social media, and again on billboards. Next slide. We also did radio spots. And we have a website. The website is up and going. And so you can go to that and download the guide, download the handout. And also on our website is a suggestion, encouragement to reach out to Kansas Power the Positive for the employee survey that they administer. Next slide. This is a video that we had it's a short video that was actually embedded in some of the ads that we had put out on social media. So it's something that they had to watch. Sometimes you get those ads, right, that you have to watch before you can go on to content. That's what this was. And if you can play that, Julia.
Businesses that invest in their employees' well-being see higher productivity and lower turnover. Employers can gain a competitive edge over other companies by implementing family-forward workplace practices that attract and retain employees, support pregnant and breastfeeding employees. Click to learn how First 1,000 Days Kansas, an initiative of the Kansas Breastfeeding Coalition, can help your company implement these workplace practices. Together, we can strengthen our state and support the development of healthy children.
Thanks. So that was the ad. That was the ad that was seen on the social media as well. And then the other component that's a part of the campaign is outreach, which the Kansas Breastfeeding Coalition has been doing for over 10 years. We've been exhibiting at the Kansas SHRM conference since 2012. So this, I think, will be our 11th or 12th time there. And you can see a photo from last year's exhibit. And then we also exhibit at the Working Well event in Wichita as well. And anytime where we can interface with employers, we are out and about. So again, promoting the 4 practices and getting the word out directly to employers. And we're going to be at the HR conference September 11th and 12th in Mulvane for the next SHRM conference. So we're going to continue to do this. And we have all sorts of resources there as well from also the Kansas Power the Positive comes along with us on the materials. Okay, next slide. So I just wanted to show you what's inside the guides because I couldn't literally, if we were together in the room, I'd be handing them out. But this is the page and the structure for every single one of the policies. It'll say paid leave on this page, benefits to employers, children, and parents. And this is the theme. And you can see that this information to us is not surprising, but to package this together for the employers to understand what's in it for them, we really have to speak their language and talk about the benefits to the employers. And we understand the benefits to the family. So this is the example of the paid leave page, for example. Next page. Slide. Thanks. The flexible work and scheduling, similar format, just tweaked the content to this as well. And the next page, slide. The subsidized childcare, and this one on the next slide. Thanks. We also break down what this child care daycare tax assistant that passed a tax credit that passed a few years ago. It's kind of complex. And so we wanted to make sure that we had additional information in the guide about how to do this. And when we give presentations, this is actually a slide from the presentations that I give where we use a toolkit that we discovered from Wyandotte County that they actually have a calculator where they can help employers to understand what their tax credit would be. So we, again, are trying to lift up all the resources that are available in our state. Next slide. And the last one, which is the one that we actually got started with the Kansas Breastfeeding Coalition, is accommodations for pregnant and breastfeeding workers. And so this is also one of those 4 practices. And by the way, happy National Breastfeeding Month. Kansas Breastfeeding Month is also August. So we are in the middle of National and Kansas Breastfeeding Month. I could not talk to you all and not mention that. So the accommodations and support are also in the guide. Next slide. Okay, and there's my contact information. I think many of you may know how to get a hold of me, but for those who don't, there's my contact information. And as we now turn our attention to Sophia and her presentation with Kansas of the Power of the Positive, I just thought we might check in with all of you and get your impressions about what do you, when you hear the word family-friendly workplace, what do you think of? It's a phrase we often kind of throw around, bandy about, if you will, as a bandy. And what is it that we mean? And what is it that you think of? So, Bree, if you could launch that poll. Thank you. And you can check all of these that you think of when you hear the phrase family-friendly workplace. Great. Okay, I'm seeing the responses coming in. Okay, we've heard from almost everybody. Should we just keep it open just like another 3 seconds or so for those of you who are thinking? Interesting. Okay, so Bree, whenever you're ready, if you want to share the results so they can all see. Thanks. Okay. Well, I hope that you understand some of these were kind of tongue in cheek to have fun with this. And so thank you all for not choosing babies crying at meetings. But sometimes that is what we think of or what sometimes employers think of. So thank you for your work in supporting family-friendly workplaces. And I'm going to turn this over to Sophia. I think, Julia, you have her introduction.
Yes, thank you so much, Brenda. Thank you for all of that wonderful information, important information for everybody. Next up, we do have Sophia Ringering, an epidemiologist for the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, as well as a member of the Kansas Power of the Positive Coalition. She supports public health programs and grants specifically in the areas of adverse childhood experiences and violence and unintentional childhood injury. So without further ado, Sophia, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Hello everyone again. My name is Sophia and I'm an EPI here at KDHE. I primarily work with our injury and violence prevention programs. And today I'm going to be sharing with you some of the work our Kansas Power of the Positive Coalition has been doing on family-friendly workplaces in Kansas. Next. Yep, so to do some level setting, the Kansas Power of the Positive, or KPoP, is a statewide coalition that focuses on the prevention of child abuse, neglect, and adverse childhood experiences. with the end goal of creating those safe and stable environments for our children in Kansas to grow up in. And with our CDC Essentials for Childhood grant funding that we're currently on, we focus on two main strategies. So changing social norms that support parents and promote positive parenting, and then strengthening economic supports to families, which is going to be where our family-friendly work efforts fall. Next. So we've heard a bit from Brenda already about why family-friendly workplaces matter. And this is just another data point that our partners also find pretty eye-opening. So over 15% of Kansas families with a child under 5 years old had job changes due to problems with childcare. And this is from 2022, and it has risen pretty steadily since the pandemic. And this is largely tied back to a few things, mostly by how much the family dynamics have changed over the last decade, from not only their makeup and their roles, but definitely the priorities of parents. And what we're seeing in Kansas is that family-friendly policies have also lagged behind, which does leave our working parents struggling. A lot of current employer policies are based on the outdated model of a two-parent household, with the one parent who works outside the home for pay, and then the other who's the primary caretaker of the kids. However, today, only about 1 in 5 families actually looks like that. Next. Yeah. There's many benefits of family-friendly policies for employees. But I want to also point out that it's not only in the increase in access to resources and parenting support, but it's also in the reduction of stress that they'll have from not having to be in a constant state of worry, which in turn is less stress and conflict that follows them back in the home. And it's also in their ability to play a more active and present role in their child's life, which will also promote more positive childhood experiences for everyone out in the community. Next. And there's also many benefits for employers, from productivity to retention. It's not only a way to move those who are unemployed into the workforce, but it's also a way to recognize those who are already there working and what they need to be more successful. And we're also seeing more and more as we kind of move forward with these efforts, the individuals are starting to seek out employers who offer these family-friendly benefits over other things, which is another way to help businesses with their recruitment and sets them apart from everyone else. So when we first began looking into this strategy early on, we weren't quite sure where to get started. But the first step that we determined was to get some baseline data to see exactly where we were at. We had hypothesized that these policies were important. There's a lot of research at the national level that told us they were, but we really wanted to assess what was important in our state and what the needs of our Kansas employees were. So our KPoP coalition developed a survey. It's really more of an assessment tool that was designed with two main focuses and groups in mind. So it's for local businesses and employers who want to know more, maybe about why they have a high turnover rate and a low retention of employees, and really what they can do to improve upon their practices. And then the other focus was going to be on the actual employees of the businesses and asking them about their priorities and what they would need to be able to provide for their children. And we also wanted to assess how these needs are or are not being met currently. And from those two perspectives is how we prioritize our next step for creating those family-friendly environments. So here you can see the 19 identified family-friendly workplace conditions that we look at. And these are going to be the conditions that have been determined to be protective factors for families and children, mainly through their impact on working parents and providing the support that they need. And that goes beyond just providing the basic necessities for their children, but to also play that more present role in their child's life. And you're probably familiar with a few of these. From a flexible work schedule that may allow time for family issues as they arise, especially when the school day ends 2 hours earlier than the work day, childcare access, subsidies, paid parental leave for both parents, breastfeeding accommodations, furthering education. These are going to be the policies that allow for parents to prioritize their families first and really set them up to be a better parent for their children. And each question in our self-assessment ties back to one of these conditions. So here's just an example from the online report that we share back with employers. And you can see each of the 19 conditions will be on the left, followed by the average workplace rating in the middle. So how the employees rated their workplace at providing this condition. And then on the far right, how important each condition is to employees with children at home. And from this, our program staff provide guidance back to the businesses on what they can do to improve based on the gaps that are seen here. So if a condition is rated low or poor, but the employees had ranked it as being extremely important to them, that would be considered a priority area for improvement. And another unique part of this assessment is that if an employer is already doing an excellent job at providing a family-friendly condition, then they can sign up to act as a mentor for other businesses on how to improve and give them actual examples of how it's implemented in their business. So this survey tool is how we are assessing the needs of working parents in Kansas. So when looking at the statewide results, we found that there's a lot of room for improvement and for progress to be made. So to date, with feedback from nearly 3,000 employees currently, in the gray box, we have the top 4 conditions that were rated as being the most poorly provided by employers. So that top spot with the overall worst rating we've seen was on-site childcare, followed closely by subsidized childcare costs, and then employer-sponsored family events, and access to parenting support. So overall, this tells us that a pretty big priority area moving forward is going to be childcare and getting people support in that realm. In addition to those overall survey results that we just looked at, that kind of summarize the average response across all employees grouped together, we realized that we also needed to acknowledge the diversity of the workforce in our state. And with that, we had quite a few discussions on looking at our family-friendly workplace efforts through an equity lens, which really brought us to realize that different employees will have different needs in being able to provide for their family. And that the needs of maybe a married working parent will likely be different from a single mother who might have less support at home, households with a lower versus higher income, maybe those living in a rural or urban area, or even specific minority groups will have different needs compared to others. And a big part of equity in the workplace is acknowledging and meeting these needs. Next. So from there, we broke down the survey results by employee characteristics. So on the screen, you can see the 5 most important family-friendly conditions across a variety of employee groups. So when asked what was the most important for employees and their ability to provide that safe and stable environment for their children, these are what was ranked highest and as extremely important. So this visual, it really helps us to take a step back and see the bigger picture of what's important. So to not only all employees in that first column on the left, but also to certain groups of employees based on age, different parenting types, income, race and ethnicity, or maybe where they live in the state. And these conditions are color-coded, so you can easily see the difference in how they're ranked. But across the board and in that top most important spot for all groups is livable wages. And That one's going to be a little more of an expected response when surveying employees because income does tie into everything. But what had surprised us early on is that second most important condition across all groups being a flexible work schedule that would allow time for the family issues. And then in the third through fifth ranked conditions is where you start to see the difference in priorities a little more in between groups. So the ability to telework, we've seen that rise quite a bit as a priority over the past couple years. But you can see that Gen X values this higher as compared to millennials who put a greater value in paid parental leave. When looking at a parent type, fathers value a predictive schedule and opportunities to further education more than others. And then moving on down among single mothers and the lower household income group, you can see the importance of a domestic violence policy pop up higher than others. And then minority employees rank a predictable schedule as more important than maybe their white non-Hispanic peers. So being able to see the difference between groups was pretty eye-opening for us, as before we had only looked at the overall responses grouped together. And lastly, I want to highlight the policy changes that we've seen as a result of this assessment tool, and then the overall impact and reach that it's had across the state. So to date, there's been 28 policy changes that have been implemented among local employers towards creating that family-friendly work environment. And the most common areas we've seen in policy and practice changes have been among implementing the ability to telework and increased access to parenting education and support, breastfeeding policies, and that goes not only for providing a room and a safe place for mothers to breastfeed, but also in allowing an adequate break time for breastfeeding, and then implementing policies to protect victims of domestic violence. And with that, some employers also noted a couple areas of difficulty in policy change, whether it was due to costs or capacity or another limitation. And that was getting the ability to bring children to on-site childcare. And then also a large majority of employers had said that they would not make changes regarding offering subsidized childcare costs as part of their employment package. So those are kind of two areas that are facing difficulty in getting policy change at this time. But over the 5 years that we've been working on this strategy, these policy changes have impacted a total number of about 10 to 12,000 employees across the state. And that total number of employees working in those businesses that made a policy change. So here's an overview of how the assessment process works. But really, the main step is getting connected to the Kansas Children's Service League, because they will help guide you through this entire process from start to finish and then some. And I know these steps, they look pretty easy on the screen, but from an implementation standpoint, there's at least 6 to 7 touch points from someone on our team reaching out to businesses before that business gets entirely on board and starts to see the value that family-friendly policies can have. Next. Here we go. And in closing, we really just want to push the message that strong families build strong businesses, and that working parents shouldn't have to choose between the families that they love at home and then the paychecks that they need to provide. So although we've come a long way from where we started with this initiative 5 years ago, we still have a lot more work to do. And we do want everyone involved. So not just business owners to take the assessment, but also community members and partners to help share about why these family-friendly workplace policies matter in the first place. So the website for more information is on the screen. And I think it's been shared in the chat as well, with the email address that can be reached out to for questions. But I guess I just want to thank everyone for your time, and you can let me know if you have any questions at the end.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sophia. You guys are taking big steps to push this work forward, and we all appreciate that. Moving forward with the presentation, next we are going to get some boots on the ground perspective from Kim Polson in the workforce, who is the executive director of the Community Children's Center, which is a nonprofit that serves Douglas County families with children prenatal through 5, as well as early childhood professionals. So Kim, the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much. This has been a process that has been going on in Douglas County for over 2 years. We've been in the process of engaging our businesses in conversations, and I will reiterate that there are multiple touch points that need to take place before we can even begin to move the needle with businesses in our community. But what I'd like to share with you is a little bit of our experiences over the past couple of years, both the obstacles as well as some highlights. So next slide, please. So we did a very brief survey of our own community and our businesses with the support of our Chamber of Commerce, who put surveys out for us to all of their membership to encourage them to respond to our survey. And one of the big questions we wanted an answer to was, what role did businesses feel like they should play in a community's childcare infrastructure? And one of those was a shareholder, basically having a level of interest as at similar levels to other entities within our community. The second was a connector, being an entity through the Human Resources Department who would help employees connect to childcare aware or to connect to local childcare providers in their community to help smooth that process of identifying open childcare spots. The third was an investor in the infrastructure. So a business or employer who would be willing to put some money towards the infrastructure solutions, and that could be donations to nonprofit childcare. That could be donations within a community to building community-based childcare. The fourth was a contributor, and that was the subsidizing piece. So that would be if they felt that they had a role in helping to pay for that monthly tuition for families to make sure they had access to high quality and reliable care. The fifth was a provider, and that would be the on-site childcare that we've talked about, where potentially an employer would open a daycare facility within their own business campus and provide childcare there. Luckily, there were only 2% that reported that businesses should play no role in the community's childcare infrastructure. But this is an interesting breakdown, and you'll see it's fairly well spread. The good news is that I think we see those at 3 and 4, whereas investor and contributor, we do see where businesses could be willing to help make up some of the financial loss that's in between what families can afford to pay and what childcare providers should be making. Next slide. Some of the highlights of the survey were the availability of affordable infant toddler care is important. So we had 60% saying yes, 20% somewhat. So the reality of the situation is the businesses acknowledge it's important, Being willing to contribute financially gets you to a little bit different scenario, as you would expect, where only 11% said yes, they would be willing to contribute, but 60%, 66% said maybe, which means that we feel we have a window of opportunity to educate our local employers to the benefits and the return on the investment of contributing financially to early childhood care and education. What we also found was that not all businesses had calculated the cost of turnover. 82% had not. 83% had not calculated their own estimate of absenteeism and the financial impact. And I'll talk a little bit about that cost of turnover a little bit later, but when you can calculate that and put it in dollars and cents, that oftentimes will speak to an employer in ways that other aspects will not. A childcare benefit would be a compelling addition to a benefits package. We've got, again, a window of opportunity where the majority said yes or maybe, where we could hopefully, with that additional education, increase the actual benefits package, including childcare in some capacity. Willing to contribute to that benefit financially. Again, we have a window, but what we uniquely found was that it almost always would depend upon an employee's position. So this is something that they might be utilizing as a recruitment or retention tool for some of their higher level staff, or those staff that they've invested the most training and into. So that is really where it comes into an interesting scenario that it's really dependent upon the role that that employee would play. We found that 60% of those responding wanted to be contacted about our project of family-friendly workplace practices in Douglas County. But what we'll find as we move forward is that that doesn't always translate into in-person dialogue and conversation. Next slide. So we here in Douglas County, we're in the process of implementing an early childhood community center. Within that center, it will be a licensed childcare facility where we are approaching it from a model of thirds. Again, looking at how we can infuse additional investment into the childcare infrastructure so that we can reduce those tuition rates and increase those wages. We envision that by community members who can afford to pay for childcare, those who are receiving DCF subsidies, and we're utilizing that as another third. And then we are looking for employers who are willing to sponsor a childcare spot for one of their employees and looking at that investment. And so this is the avenue that we're taking, and we've got a long way to go from engaging in that conversation to getting employers to that investment phase. Next slide. So how does it work? In our environment, we're approaching this, and again, this is a pilot program that we're working with. So we're also talking with employers about how to make this work better for them. But the employer would pay a $10,000 annual fee to reserve a childcare slot for an employee who currently needs or will need an infant or toddler spot. One of the things that we anticipate doing is that we will manage our capacity in a way that when an employee goes in and tells human resources that they're expecting, when they anticipate and would like to return to work, that gives us a runway of time in which to make sure that we can move our students around and make sure that we are able to reserve capacity by also holding back some spots that we're using for occasional care rather than regular scheduled care. So giving us some flexibility, so when an employer needs a spot for an employee, we'd be able to help accommodate that. So we'll reserve a slot based on the anticipated date it will be needed. And then the employer, we work with them to pay monthly childcare tuition to Community Children's Center in full. So our payment is coming from the employer, and that employer can recoup all or a portion of the tuition costs from the employee via payroll deduction. So similar to health insurance benefits. Now, ideally, they would also be subsidizing that that benefit as well, to help reduce the cost to the employee. So the employer can retain the slot with ongoing investment, and if an employee leaves their position, the sponsored child care slot remains with the employer, and the employee's child will remain in a flex slot until a community slot opens up or they obtain other child care. So that's how we're envisioning this program will work. Next slide. So how are we doing in this? And again, we really started this conversation in 2022. And a lot of that began with the Family Friendly Workplace survey coming about, and how we wanted to implement that in our community. We've engaged in dialogue with 23 businesses. We were specifically looking towards our businesses that have non-traditional hours, because we are planning on implementing that in our early childhood community center. And looking at those who historically have not had childcare readily available to their employees. So figuring where we could potentially fill a gap and make the biggest impact. We've then had 11 in-person meetings with HR or leadership. Typically, when I would go to these meetings, I was going with our VP for external affairs from our Chamber of Commerce. We know that from our experience that business person to business person is really where you can make some difference and make some headway in a conversation. Having an early childhood professional asking for that appointment and or leading that appointment, we have found it's been less likely that we're going to get our foot in the door. So having a partner, whether that be an employer champion in your community, your Chamber of Commerce, a combination of both, makes a big difference. I've presented to Jayhawk SHRM, which is our local Society for Human Resources Management group. Interestingly enough, one of those was probably a group of about 40, and asking them about the employer child care tax credits. No one was aware. So we know there's education that needs to happen to make sure that we are sharing not only the family-friendly workplace practices, but also that the benefits that are there for employers and how to maximize those. So our return has been, we've had one employer who has invested in the model to date. And you'll hear a little bit about that through a video just here in a second. So obviously this is less than what we would have hoped for, but the employer who has invested in the model has done so in a way that is exactly what we'd like to be able to replicate with other employers in our community. We also are having a Douglas County Economic Development Corporation community meeting later this month, specifically to talk about how to elevate early childhood wages for our professionals. So looking at what are the economic entities within your own community that can help you drive this message forward and be your partner and champion in those conversations. So we'll go ahead. Julia, do you want to go ahead and play the video?
My name is Melissa Rooker. I serve as the Executive Director of the Kansas Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund. We were excited to be able to support the Community Children's Center because we know that the first 5 years of a child's life are the most important. But we also know that workforce parents need to know that their children will be well cared for so that they can report to work.
Childcare is one of the major components why people have to leave the workforce. Everyone benefits from high quality, affordable childcare in their community.
Hi, my name's Ron Gacious. As a retired small business owner, I recognize that childcare responsibilities for young families are extraordinarily difficult, not only to find, but to pay for.
I'm Kirsten Flory. I'm the president and CEO of Foundations Commercial Real Estate and the board president for the Community Children's Center. As a working parent, as we were trying to grow our careers, childcare was a big part of our lives. Fast forward 15, 20 years later, and I'm faced with a group talking about economic development and how does this play into our lives? It absolutely plays into our lives. I own a business and I have staff. I think about how my team and my clients, have support systems. So I get the best of them when they come to work with me, and we can create amazing things together.
My name is Mike Bernholtz. I'm the plant manager here at Amor. There's no jobs here, there's careers, because every single employee is an investment. We're investing in your training, we're investing in your future, we're going to invest in you. Because you got to think about sometimes, why do people work here? Why do they want to stay here? What's the glue that keeps you here? I would challenge most businesses to go back and take a look at what the cost of turnover is. My cost of turnover is $13,000 an employee. So I start looking at the operation and, what can we do, right? How do you improve people's lives? What's important to them? Families are important. That's really why we're here. There just isn't a lot of childcare opportunities. To put a child of 0 to 5 anywhere for childcare is nearly impossible. It's expensive. So what we were planning on doing here at Amor is subsidizing that cost. You're adding to your culture of your company. You're providing something that is a big need. Where I know it works and where I know it's actually effective is our turnover. Turnover went from that 17, 18-ish% down to less than 5 the last 4 months. But even then, you're still not really done. People want investment in them.
It's the workforce of today that needs childcare for their children, but it's the workforce of tomorrow that's being cared for in those programs. So we are definitely needing to make sure that we are doing the best we can to provide good quality opportunities for our kids.
So what we know, and as Mike in the video was talking about, he knows his return and his on investment in this, because they have already taken a look at what does it cost to have an employee turnover. So SHRM estimates that it costs 6 to 9 months of an employee's salary to recruit and onboard a new employee to replace them. At the Douglas County median hourly wage of a little over $22, replacing an employee could cost between $24,000 and $35,000. So when we know that and we present employers with an opportunity for a $10,000 investment, plus hopefully subsidizing tuition to keep that particular employee that they've invested so much in, we're hopeful that they'll see the dollars and cents. So we're thinking, why not give them a reason to stay? I do want to mention also that we've had 6 of our employers who have done the family-friendly workplace survey through that we were just talking about with the previous speaker. So they have been doing that and looking at that. Many of times what we're hearing are similar things where we can move the needle in these areas, but we can't move it in others. And what we need to do is be able to help identify strategies to move the needle and where it's easiest, get them on board with family-friendly practices, and then show them the return on investment from childcare. Next slide. So that's what we're doing in Douglas County. I will tell you, it's definitely a long game, but we're hopeful that we'll be able to get those employers who invest in this model with us to serve as mentors and guidance for the rest of our community as to the role that the employer should play in the early childhood infrastructure. So that's it for me.
Kim, thank you so very much. Anybody, if we have any questions or comments about the 3 presentations we just heard, if you want to pop off mute or put something in the chat, please feel free to do that before I get into our early childhood systems updates. All right, I'm not seeing anything right now. I'm going to move forward with the early childhood systems updates, but if something comes through in the chat, I will make sure to ask our presenters. All right, so first things first, let's not forget about these fabulous resources that we just talked about to help promote family-friendly and family-forward workplaces in Kansas. There will be a link in the chat. Bree will put there on the family-friendly workplace survey and that guide to family-forward workplaces that Brenda was talking about. So when we look at family-friendly and family-forward workplaces, we know that they're business smart. Family-friendly workplaces provide a competitive advantage in attracting and retaining talent, increasing productivity and employee satisfaction, and reducing absenteeism. They're family-friendly. Employees who work in family-friendly organizations are more satisfied with their jobs, more engaged with their work, and less likely to leave the workforce. And on top of that, family-friendly benefits have a direct positive impact on children's and parents' health and well-being. And family-forward workplaces are also future-ready. Family-friendly business policies support children's healthy development, building a strong foundation for future learning at a critical time in childhood development. When we support young children in their earliest years, they grow into healthy kids and adults who are ready for school and for life. And in part, our communities, our workforce, and our economy become stronger and more productive. So make sure that you take advantage of these resources after today. The next parent and caregiver fireside chat being held by the family leadership team is going to be on August 26th from 6 to 7 p.m. via Zoom. This month's topic is on prenatal to postpartum for expecting parents and infants to 12 months. The registration for this fireside chat is open, and Bree will drop the link for that registration into the chat. The ages and stages questionnaires, they are offering free online ASQ subscriptions for any organization that provides developmental screenings or would like to start providing developmental screenings are welcome to join. To sign up and for more information, you can contact your local Community Part C account administrator. You can locate yours on the ASQ contacts list that Bree will put into the chat for you as well. And if you have any other questions, you can reach out to Stacy Clark from KSDE. Her email is sclark@ksde.org. Childcare Community Partnership Grants. Childcare Aware of Kansas is excited to announce that they, hopped ahead there, that they are offering Childcare Community Partnership Grants in the 2024-2025 fiscal year. So Childcare Aware of Kansas, in partnership with the Kansas Department for Children and Families, provide technical assistance and funding opportunities for Kansas communities working to address access to affordable, high-quality childcare. And they are doing that with these Childcare Community Partnership Grants. They will be awarding 15 community-led coalitions with $30,000. It is anticipated that these applications will open in September and close in October. But you can find more information on the Child Care Aware website, as well as the All In for Kansas Kids e-newsletter. And for those of you that may have received one of these grants in the past, these will be different for future grantees as there will be more stringent guidelines to follow. And again, as I said, more information on that can be found on the Child Care Aware website. Kansas LEND training opportunities. LEND is the Kansas Leadership Education in Neurodevelopmental and Related Disabilities. They are providing monthly trainings on developmental disability topics, including autism, red flags, and screenings, speech language development, and positive behavioral supports, with a Spanish language option for the speech language development training as well. These trainings are provided via online webinar for easy accessibility and are approved for continuing education hours through KDHE. So you can check out their training webinar schedule via the link in the chat. And as Brenda mentioned earlier, it is National Breastfeeding Month in August, and we want to celebrate Kansas. Kansas ranks high in successful breastfeeding rates, ranking 4th in the nation for rates of infants exclusively breastfeeding at 3 months, and 5th in the nation for rates of infants exclusively breastfeeding at 6 months. So the Kansas Breastfeeding Coalition was pleased to share the attached analysis of the new breastfeeding data released by the CDC. That is being placed in the chat. And Kansas continues to exceed the national average in all measures. So pat on the back for us here. And just a few reminders and next steps before I send you off on this Wednesday. The Early Childhood Recommendations panel meeting for August is this Friday, the 16th from 9 to 11:30 a.m. Our next systems building webinar is going to be held on Wednesday, September 11th, and that's going to be a presentation on the new All In for Kansas Kids strategic plan. As always, held from 12 to 1. And the next Children's Cabinet meeting will be held on Friday, October 4th from 9 to noon. As always, you can find all of these meetings on the Children's Cabinet YouTube channel, where they are either live streamed or the recordings are uploaded after the fact. So thank you so much for joining us today. You can continue to stay up to date with All In for Kansas Kids by signing up for that e-newsletter that goes out weekly, following on X, formerly known as Twitter, and also subscribing to the Kansas Children's YouTube channel. Thank you so much, and I hope everybody has a wonderful Wednesday.